Welcome back. It is now time for our scripture reading. And my scripture today is from the New Living Translation of the Bible, the book of Esther, chapter 4, verses 9 through 17. And Hatak returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Then Esther told Hatak and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all of the king's officials and even the people in the province know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his golden scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So Hatak gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief of the Jews will arise for some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Thus ends the reading of our scripture, Esther chapter 4, verses 9 through 17. During the month of March, we celebrate Women's History Month. This year, the theme is providing healing, promoting hope. As a tribute to the ceaseless work of caregivers and frontline workers during the pandemic, and as a recognition of the thousands of ways that women of all cultures have provided both healing and hope throughout history. Little is said of the women in the Bible. The book of Esther is 9 chapters and 9 pages. The book of Ruth is 4 chapters and 5 pages. Out of more than 1,200 pages in the Lamsa translation of the Bible, 2 books and 14 pages are named after women. But that does not diminish, nor does it define the significance women have played in history. Many years ago, I was told by a wise person that some people are meant to be in the spotlight and others quietly work away behind the scenes. They are the unseen and the unsung heroes. Such is the case with many women throughout history. Up until the mid to late 1900s, we were to be seen, but not heard. Many women were taught our lot in life was to get married, take care of our husbands, raise the children, and cook and clean. My mother was born in the 1920s, and during her generation, very few women were given the opportunity to go to college. Some of you may remember the movie Mona Lisa Smile with Julia Roberts that was released in 2003. The movie portrayed an all-women liberal arts college in Massachusetts, and the central theme dramatized how women who attended the college were not doing it to prepare for a career. Instead, their goal was preparing themselves to be a good wife. That's what you did. And few women opted to break the mold, but there were some who did, and they chose to study for a career path. While this isn't a true story, there is some truth to the premise of the story. In my lifetime, I have witnessed and become a part of the many changes of the roles women played in society. And as the saying goes, we've come a long way, baby, but we are still climbing Jacob's ladder. Ecclesiastes says, for everything there is a season and a time for every activity under heaven. Divine order in action. There was a time for the divine feminine energy to quietly work behind the scenes, and a time for this divine feminine energy to move to the forefront, to be leaders of nations, Supreme Court justices, and ambassadors at the United Nations Council. Now, it is important to mention the divine feminine energy is embodied in each individual, both male and female. Regardless of whether our path has been or continues to be behind the scenes, our contributions to humanity have been significant and countless. Our scripture lesson today teaches us about the contributions of Esther. After her parents passed away, she was raised by her cousin Mordecai, who took her in as his own daughter. The king was looking for a new wife, and when he met Esther, he loved her more than any of the other women presented to him, and he made her his queen. Sometime later, a situation occurred outside of the palace where two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway became angry, and they conspired to assassinate the king. Mordecai heard about this plot, and he told Esther, and she in turn reported this to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. The king was very grateful. Now, I want you to remember this because it will come into play later in the scripture. In the kingdom, there was a nobleman named Haman, who the king promoted over all the other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. And Haman ordered everyone to bow down to him and show him their respect. But Mordecai, who was a Jew, refused. Haman became outraged that he would not bow down to him. He plotted his revenge, not only against Mordecai, but against all the Jews in the empire. Haman convinced the king to issue a decree giving him the power to do as he saw fit against the Jews and Mordecai. Haman issued an order that all Jews, young and old, must be killed, and their property would be given to those who killed them. Quite chilling. There is a reason why Esther was placed where she was. Divine order. Mordecai tells Esther of Haman's plot to kill the Jews, and he asked her for her help since she was the queen. However, she would have to ask to hold court with the king. And there was a law providing that if he did not accept the invitation, you would be put to death. If he accepted, he would offer the golden scepter. She had to choose between speaking up and risking her life or remaining silent. It was a difficult decision. Mordecai sent her a message that said, "Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. In other words, we can't hide and ignore the injustices because they will come to us." Sounds a little bit similar to what's happening in the world right now. He goes on to say that if she doesn't help the Jews, someone else will. But even so, she will still die. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was made queen as to be put into a position to help. Esther was being prepared her whole life for this pivotal moment. Interestingly, Mordecai tells her that if she chooses not to help her people, someone else will. But regardless, she will still die. What this means, that if she doesn't rise to the occasion of what she was meant to do, a piece of her may die inside. We too may encounter situations where we are given opportunities and we have to make some tough choices. And if we don't seize the opportunity, we may live with regret. Esther made the decision that even though it was against the law, she would go to see the king. She accepted her fate, that if she must die for violating the law, she would do so to stand up for the injustices being sought against her cousin and the Jews. And she continued and fasted for 3 days, meaning she denied error thinking by shutting out the world and going deep within as she prepared herself for this pivotal moment. Esther entered the king's court, and she was welcomed by the king as he held out the golden scepter to her. The king gave her favor and told her she could have anything she wanted. Her wish was for the king and Haman to join her for a banquet. And remember what I said earlier about Mordecai having the king's back when his guards were plotting to assassinate him? Well, the king didn't forget about what Mordecai had done for him. He honored him for his nobility, which further angered Haman. And when the king and Haman joined Esther for the banquet that she had requested, she revealed to the king Haman's plot to assassinate the Jews and Mordecai and even her. The king was outraged and the tables turned. The destruction Haman sought to do to others came back on him. And now he was the one begging for his life. There are many lessons in this scripture. First, we will look at what this means metaphysically. As you have heard the WMC minister say, each person in the Bible represents an aspect of us, and each lesson a phase in our spiritual growth. Metaphysically, Esther represents the spiritual power of love within us. that will overcome physical will. Our spiritual will overcoming the physical. Her cousin Mordecai is our humbleness, who will seek to find our inner spiritual truth until we are victorious and find the truth. And the Jew symbolizes our spiritual thoughts. Lastly, Haman represents the physical will. If we are not careful, it can sometimes work against us when our ego is dictating our decisions. And in this lesson, the ego was bruised and the ego sought revenge. Now, let's put this in context and tie it together. Esther, or our spiritual power, was raised by Mordecai, or our humbleness in seeking spiritual truth. Haman, our ego, wanted to be in control. And when it wasn't, it was bruised and sought to extinguish the flame for our desire for spiritual truth. Seeking to destroy not only Mordecai or our drive and thirst for spiritual freedom, but also the Jews, which represents our spiritual thoughts. Our spiritual self had to choose between fighting for spiritual righteousness or succumbing to the will of the ego and losing who we are. When we choose spiritual growth, we will touch the King's golden scepter. And what is that? That is the highest level of understanding. Those are those higher levels of consciousness. And no matter how hard Haman or our ego tries to interfere and stop us, our spiritual drive will lead us to the highest level of understanding. And that is when we are free. The truth will set us free, and spiritual love will be victorious. I share with you a story about my own personal life. Many years ago, when I started on this spiritual path, I was in a relationship with a man in California who I thought would be my husband. There were many red flags, but I chose to overlook them in my physical desire to pursue what I thought was the American dream: a marriage, 2 kids, and a white picket fence. But when I got on this spiritual path, I started to listen to my inner voice. And it became louder and louder until it finally got my attention and I listened. And when I did, I knew I had to make a tough decision. I could put my head in the sand and ignore my inner spiritual voice and stay in the relationship. If I stayed, I could have had the white picket fence and the 2-car garage, but I would have lost myself and began to die inside. Or I could be courageous and strong and risk that I may never attain what I thought was the American dream. I listened to my inner spiritual voice, and I made the tough decision to end the relationship. And oh yes, it was painful, and I cried alligator tears. But it would have been a greater pain to lose my life by not fulfilling my life purpose. The truth set me free, and spiritual love was victorious. And if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't be here today. experiencing an even better version of the American dream. Another lesson of this scripture is that when we listen to the inner spiritual voice, we are receptive to living in the divine flow, attuned to opportunities where we can make a difference. I believe that as part of our life path, we have chosen experiences or situations where we have prepared for such a moment or opportunity. It doesn't have to be in the forefront because the person working behind the scenes plays just as important of a role. But we can't play it safe, hiding in the palace. Or we can boldly forge ahead, living without regret and never having to wonder what could have been if only we had the courage. Throughout history, many great women quietly worked behind the scenes. They didn't do it to be recognized. They did it because it needed to be done. Women, such as Elizabeth Blackwell, she was the first woman to receive a medical degree in the United States. She was discriminated against as a female physician and worked in the shadows of her male counterparts as a nurse during the Civil War. Elizabeth championed for the participation of women in the medical profession and eventually opened a medical college for women. Mother Mary. Mother Mary was a humble woman, and she was chosen to bring the Christ child into the world. Mother Teresa devoted her life to caring for those who had no one to care for them, those with HIV/AIDS, leprosy, and tuberculosis, to name a few illnesses. She was canonized as Saint Teresa of Calcutta. In 2022, we have a woman vice president and women judges on the highest court in the United States. We have a woman on the United Nations Council standing up to the aggressors of the world. To everything, there is a time and a purpose. Our journey may be preparing us for that one moment when we can have an impact upon humanity. So when that opportunity presents itself, just as it did for Esther, we choose to boldly rise to the occasion, being champions for our own spiritual growth and carrying the torch, lighting the path for others, trying to find their way. To be like Mother Teresa, who dedicated her life to loving and caring for the unloved. In honor of Women's History Month, let it be our goal and our intent to promote healing and promote hope throughout the world. Namaste.